Hi, David. We're going to take a look at your emotive squares project and offer some observations, some feedback on there. So we'll go ahead and screen share here. All right. And so here we are. We've got the objects here. And first of all, your naming is just fine in terms of getting your name. Go ahead and make sure you're putting your last name or at least an initial or something like that. Not that I don't think I have any other Davids in the class, but be sure that you're accurately putting your name on here. I don't have a problem with being able to read David, but I think just as exercise, go ahead and at least put your last initial, or even just go with your last name and your first initial, something that would be more distinguishing than simply your first name, which in some other cases might be a lot of other Davids. So anyway, but this is all fine. You're finished assignment. I see you adopted, I think it was you. I reviewed Laura's project already, and I recall, and I don't remember if it was you that commented on how much you liked the way she presented, and so that maybe you adopted it, but she adopted a very similar format here in terms of organizing them in this grid fashion. And I think it's a good way to put the presentation together. The one drawback you're going to see, though, is when I kind of try to come in on these, I can't. So that's a little bit of a drawback. I can't sort of fill the screen with your designs, but seeing that these are primarily like thumbnail versions of a true design, I think it's also acceptable. The green background, it's relatively, dark, and so therefore I think it's fine. There's no problem with that. So let's start off by just kind of looking at the way that you're working here, and really initially talking about the difference between design and illustration, right? Is there a difference between designing something and illustrating something? And when we talk about the difference between those two things, I think the best way to clarify that is really the intent. And a design is meant to initiate a conversation, initiate a dialogue, and initiate this sort of interaction between who is making it and the person that's viewing it, right? Between you and your viewer. And so what you're going to employ are these design principles and methodologies in order to get a viewer to arrive at a sort of thought that you intend them to get at. Now, sometimes, that is a gesture or that is a symbol, right? So if, for instance, I'm meant to sort of highlight the feeling of happiness, and I just smile, right? Now, that's happiness, right? That's an indicator, an emotive indicator that I'm happy to see you, or happy about something, and so on, right? But that's it. That's all there is. And so that's fine if that's what I'm intending to do. However, if I am attempting to communicate something a little bit more beyond that, or for better yet, I'm trying to impose happiness onto something that is, maybe a body of text, right? I've got a text, and I'm meant to design that on a page in a way that makes folks, even before they read that text, they know that this is going to be about happiness, right? Just in the way that it's organized on the page. Now, that's going to be a line between the illustration and the design. Let's look at an actual example here. In looking at your work right here, the difference between a design and an illustration is the difference between what we have here in this top one and what we have down here, which is clearly a happy face, right? It's a happy face. I don't know that there's any dispute. You wouldn't even argue that, right? Of course, it's a happy face. That's happiness. But it's a picture of something, and that's all we're ever going to get of it, is a happy face, right? This, however, gives us a sense of energy, a sense of movement, a sense of rhythm that this just simply doesn't have. And so the difference between the design and an illustration is what you're doing. Design is an organization of content, and an illustration is a measure of content, is content. And so we're working with design. We want to kind of think more about the entire picture plane and how the elements are engaging with each other, rather than perhaps a pictorial or a iconographic representation of a thing. If I'm trying to give the sense of home, right, and I arrange these squares in the shape of a house, right? You get what I'm saying. So let's look at your tension. I would suggest in just about all of these, your compositions improve as you get closer. And that doesn't mean that you have to zoom in on everything, but what it means is you want to engage in the entire picture plane. So from here to here is my picture plane, as you can see in my box here. I want to be activating all of this. And from here into here, I want to be activating all of this. Not just me, but I want the whole space, right? So I am an element, and this is an element right here in the composition. So is this an element, right? And so the way this is organized is not by mistake. Clearly, you wouldn't think that that I would put a picture up here that had this element back here just sort of maybe striking right into my head, or maybe I would be up in the air like this and my head is partially. So no, we want to think about the whole picture frame. So that's why they improve as we get kind of closer to them. Tension is a sort of element where we're trying to create a focal point where their energy is at the highest. And so I think this does it very well. We've seen, if you go through your peers' work, you're going to see this strategy done over and over. Yours is actually a little bit more sort of complex, because you've got multiple elements here that you're creating almost this wall, and then you've got these other multiple elements, and then you're using this strategy of the slightly diagonal element to create the energy, where it's like tension. I'm holding these two things aside. You'll see others where they've done it in the same strategy of the diagonal cube holding two ends aside. That is tension. That's going to give you that, definitely. There's a reason that everyone is sort of, or most everyone is coming up with this solution, but yours is actually a little bit more engaged. I like what's going on here. This could almost start to become congestion, almost. Lonely, which is a comparative, tends to work best when you are setting up that comparative. You're saying, here's an element and here's another element. This element over here is different and it is removed from the others. And that's going to give you usually the sense of the loneliness. And so therefore, I think this one is probably getting to it at its best. These, I'm not sure what's happening here. This almost seems like a misfire on your camera, like you didn't really mean to include that one. Heavy is also a comparative. The idea is a weight that's sort of coming down. Now, is heavy something that is up in the air, or is heavy something that is down low? And that, I think, is a little bit what's problematic with this design, is all the energy is up here rather than down here. What we want with heavy is things to feel like they're being pulled down, right? Being kind of aimed down into the space. And so, I'm not sure that this one goes the opposite direction. Perhaps it's not quite aiming down at it. Congestion. Now, congestion here is again, it's a pathway, right? So when we're thinking about congestion, your eye is moving in a direction across the composition, yet it's being blocked by something. In some area, it's being sort of crowded in, right? You can think of it as a bunch of people trying to get through a door, but what does that look like when it's squares? You can think about, cars that are kind of in line and one is trying to get through the other. It's all about movement that is being blocked in some way. And this comes down to the getting at the heart of your topic. As a designer, and I say designer, whether you want to be a graphic designer or whether you want to be a painter, you're still designing. Design is a language we use in visual communication. So as a designer, as you're designing what it is that you're going to show us, you want to get to the heart of your topic. Remember our three ingredients: the subject, which is the topic, the content, which is the idea itself, and then the form, which is the physical manifestation of one and two, of the subject and the content. And so the subject is what we're working on here. The subject is congested. And so what is congested at its heart? What is that? So that's really what you want to get to. And I think of all of these, You know, this one is probably where the closest. I'm not sure if we're still quite getting that energy there on this. This one's probably doing the best to get there. These overlapping, I'm not sure that that's creating the energy. No, I know that's not creating the energy that we want. And these as well. These are good attempts. These are good thumbnails, right? And by all means, when I'm looking at these, I'm really looking at how you're thinking, right? I'm looking at how you're putting these things together and managing the space, from the additive component where you're putting the squares down to the subtractive element where you're now isolating with your camera and trying to make compositions. It's a in some ways a get to know you exercise, because I'm getting to know how it is that you approach these design challenges. So let's look at your feedback. I see here that you did in fact reply to India's feedback. The way you organize your post in a grid is a cool concept. My favorite composition was the bottom row of your Congestion series. You sandwich your blocks inside each of each other. That's unique. Take the composition in more of a three-dimensional direction. Good job. Then you wrote back, "Hey India, thank you. I thought that grid idea would come in handy. Just having them all over the place didn't fit right. The only drawback is you can't get closer to view the photos." Oh, cool. I didn't even read that before I mentioned on the drawback you can't get closer. And I'm glad you caught that. I was trying to do something three-dimensional in the end. Now, that's all fine. You're mirroring back what she said and kind of talking about, you know, how you felt about what she was observing. The idea of feedback and response, feedback and reply. This is going to go for when you're giving feedback and you're receiving feedback. What do you do with it, right? What is your intention when you're offering feedback, and what is your job to do with the feedback when someone offers it? And the initial thing is to say, okay, let me think about what they said and maybe consider a comparative of what I intended. So here's what I intended, here's what they got, what's this space in between? That's kind of what you start to think about, right? I want to close that gap, right? I want to know here and here. Now, I guess that's helpful. And it is helpful to be thinking about that, because you want to think about your target and what you were trying to get. But a more kind of direct approach to maybe even getting to that is going to be, rather than setting up what you intended and what they got and what's the difference, is simply focusing on what they got, right? Forget about what you intended, okay? Let's just look at what they got and concentrate on how do they arrive at that. Because if you can do that, even if they told you exactly what you wanted to hear, right? Even if what you intended and what they got are like this, you still want to know how they got there. Because you take for granted that what you intended is how they got there, right? All the stuff you showed them is how they arrived at that. But what if it wasn't? What if what you were trying to do to get them to think that thing was irrelevant and they got there by something else that you maybe unintentionally did? You want to know that, right? Because if you know that a human being got to a certain perspective, how do they get there so that you can do that again, so that you can now try it on someone else? So rather than thinking about this comparative study with feedback, you want to think about just them. How do they get there? If you can discover that, now you have some tools to further communicate with others, and even just this person, if this person represents an audience, an entire audience. So that's what you do, which turns it back around when you're offering feedback. What are you trying to do? You are trying to first of all, observe. You're trying to offer them your observations, what you see, not what you think they want you to see, but what you're actually viewing. The second is, to be most helpful in this environment, is academic environment, that is to offer how you got there, right? This is how I arrived at my observation. That's going to be the difference between a critique, right? In an academic setting, in a critique, you're offering not just that you see this thing and this is how you feel about it. It's you're trying to share with the maker how you arrive there, because that's the most valuable information to somebody when you're giving them feedback. And then as someone receiving it, that's the most valuable information. So that's what I have for you. I hope this was helpful. I appreciate your organization and I appreciate the work you did on this project. Clearly, you're going to get a rubric-based evaluation, a grade, and you'll be able to ask me questions about that as well. So I look forward to working with you some more in class, and we will see you later on. All right. Bye-bye now.